So I am a clinical psychologist, so I work with people with some quite severe mental health issues, struggles, suffering. The particular population that my research is involved with is people with psychosis. So I will be talking a bit today about how the therapy that I use, called compassion-focused therapy, is built upon the science of the mind, the science of compassion, but also how we start applying that in distressing situations in the NHS, and actually, very importantly, for us in our day-to-day lives as well, and the things that we struggle with. So these will be the main things that I'll be addressing today. Why do we need compassion? How do we develop compassion, which was the kind of cliffhanger that Maria left us with earlier. How do we use compassion? How do we start directing it, bring it into our lives, particularly for the most tricky bits of our lives? Without wanting to give too much away, the kind of themes we'll be bringing into this talk will be seeing compassion as an integrating function of the mind, but also a healing function. So why do we need compassion? Well, in a nutshell, because the brain is an absolute mess. So we have not got a perfectly functioning brain that's nicely tailored for 21st century life in Worcestershire. We've actually got a bit of a compilation brain, a bit like a house, a very old house that's had lots of extensions built on it over the years. So parts of our brain would have been much better adapted to different periods in our evolutionary history, and we're kind of lumped with that. We have an old bit of our brain where a lot of our basic motives and emotions and innate behaviours are seated, and these are parts of our brain that we share with some other creatures, other species. But what animals don't have is this uniquely human bit of the brain, which is this sort of capacity to imagine and mentalise, to plan things long into the future, but also to sort of reflect on things in the past. And these human-like, more uniquely human-like qualities are very, very helpful. So, for instance, it's very helpful to have this new brain when we're trying to build something like the Shard in London. It takes a lot of planning and creativity and imagination and years of organisation. However, sometimes having this new brain is actually really, really annoying, because it also means that we can just keep ourselves stuck in really problematic loops. We can ruminate on something that happened last week that made us feel very anxious or very sad, and we can just keep re-triggering that sadness over and over again. So the interaction between this new brain and the old brain is very important. It can be wonderful and helpful, it can be very, very unhelpful and cause us great suffering. We can even just imagine something that we will be scared about in the future that hasn't even happened yet, and cause ourselves a lot of suffering for no reason. Here's just a little graph to explain that a little bit more. So the old brain, if it was just these kind of basic emotions and motives, this is what an emotion would do if there was just the old brain. This is kind of how it works in animals. So there's a triggering incident, and the anxiety, let's say, the emotion shoots up to a high level. And then sort of when it's done its job, it can actually come back down again to a sort of resting place. That's what emotion is really kind of designed to do, get a job done. Sort of propel us towards something that needs to happen, whether it's to run away from a lion or whatever it is. But what the new brain does is it keeps the emotion at this raised level over time. So I start dwelling on it. So this lion that just chased me from Great Malvern Station, gosh, I did get away, but what if I hadn't got away? What if it had started ripping my arms off? And what would have happened to the kids and the mortgage? So we end up re-triggering the emotional system. We don't allow the emotion to do its natural thing, which is to come back down, because we've got this really annoying human brain. Great for some things, but terrible for other things, particularly in mental health problems. And then, even worse, we start criticising ourselves as well, which is a very new brain trait. God, I'm such an idiot for reacting like that. I'm so weak for running away. So that re-triggers the old brain emotions again, if that wasn't enough already. So zebras don't have this problem. When they've been chased by a lion on the David Attenborough programs, what we see is that quite soon after the sort of lion's given up chase, the zebra quite quickly gets back to just munching away whatever's on the floor. So actually the emotions come down quite quickly, so it can carry on with, well, that looks nice, yeah, we'll get back into lunch. So the zebra's not ruminating and re-triggering the emotion. And dogs don't do this either. You don't see a dog sitting under a tree thinking about whether it's going to perform in front of all the female dogs in the park later. Or, gosh, I've put on a lot of weight recently. So the human brain is a mess. The human brain is really, really tricky. This is where we kind of start with why we need compassion. Because actually, it's really, really tough. The brain's not set up, and it's not particularly designed for our well-being and our happiness, necessarily. It's a biological organism. It has other motives, like protecting us, keeping us safe, passing on our genes. So, how can we use this knowledge about our tricky brains to increase well-being and reduce suffering? First thing, really, is just to become aware that this is what our brains are like. Develop a mindful awareness. Wow, this is pretty tough. Look at this crazy brain, firing away over there. Can we develop a kind of perspective away from that so that we're not caught up in it? We're not the ones fueling it or getting stuck in these really these patterns that can last weeks, months, years. So first of all, can we develop an awareness from over there so we can start observing our brain and our unique patterns, the loops between old brain and new brain that we individually are more likely to get stuck in. And also, can we start then to warm up this awareness as well? Can we develop a more compassionate awareness about this brain? It is tricky. It's not designed by us. We didn't choose to have a brain that does all these crazy things. And our brain is also very much shaped by our experiences, particularly our early experiences, which of course we didn't choose either. We didn't choose what postcode we were born into, what family, what genes we had, what schools we were sent to early on. We didn't choose any of that, but this is going to be hugely influential on the kind of brain that we've developed and the kind of loops that we get stuck in. Whether our brain is constantly ruminating on things we're scared about or people treating us badly, this is going to be very much shaped by our early experience as well, but it's not our fault. None of this is our fault. So can we start looking at our tricky brains from a point of view of it's not our fault, but now that I've seen that, it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility to now try and do something about that. because I know that we can train brains in different ways. We can start generating new types of experiences that are going to facilitate different patterns of brain firing. So it's not our fault, but it's our responsibility. This is a good example of where I don't have to talk much about the neuroscience, because Maria has talked about 3 main emotional systems already. I'm really glad she didn't say, now everyone, there are 4 main emotional systems. So that's good. We're on the same page with that. That's good. So the neuroscientific research has identified these 3 main emotional systems, and they've each evolved in this way for particular motives. So the threat system evolves to detect and respond to threats in the environment, and shapes every faculty of the brain in that way. So whether it's attention, it zooms into things that could go wrong, potential danger, the kind of thoughts that emerge in our head are very kind of threat-based, like black or white. I've got to see things clearly. The grey area, no, that's dangerous. I've got to see things in black and white. Our behaviour becomes also very much shaped by the threat system. So it's a full brain-body experience, the threat system. It's only interested in protecting us, not much else. But it is kind of, unfortunately for us, it is pretty much our default system. It's probably our oldest system. So we've got to keep an eye on it, because otherwise, if we take our eye off it, it'll take over and just sort of, do everything, really. It's a very important survival system. And similarly with the other 2 systems, they've also evolved for specific purposes. The drive system has evolved to help us pursue things, achieve things that we want. And when we get these things, we get these ripples of emotion through our body, which helps us kind of pursue even more. So excitement and pleasure. The kind of emotions that drive the threat system are the things that come into our body that help us protect ourselves, like anxiety or like anger. The third system, which Maria called the connecting system, is, and we quite often call it the soothing system in compassion-focused therapy, because it's often within these interpersonal connections, this sense of social safeness, is that we innately have this soothing down, sort of parasympathetic, calming effect. And you can see this very clearly when you look at attachments, like babies and their mothers. When a baby's very anxious, the mother can just, within that attachment, within that connection, can immediately start seeing the babies calm down, soothe down. So this is all hardwired into us. All these systems are hardwired into us. So in compassion-focused therapy, it's not a sort of distinct school of therapy per se, or a sort of new brand of therapy. It's more a framework for organising, for focusing therapeutic interventions based on what we know about the brain, based on what we know about how it's made up. And other therapies haven't really kind of come from that starting point. They've often come from what seems to work in therapy, and let's develop a science around that. So compassion-focused therapy is not really saying that we've got a new therapy, but we've got to focus for organising therapies within line with what we know about the brain. And what we know about the brain is that we have these systems, and if we can organise our brain in a particular way, then actually the therapy work is going to be a hell of a lot easier. It's going to be a lot easier to start addressing the things we're most scared of. It's going to be a lot easier to overcome our fears if we have the optimum conditions within our brain. So what we are arguing in compassion-focused therapy, that if we organise the brain by compassionate motives, compassion for self and others, then that creates the biological, psychological, motivational and emotional conditions where it's going to be much easier to start doing the work of therapy, the interventions. processing a trauma, overcoming a spider phobia, whatever it is. It's going to be easier if we've shaped our brain in this way first. So the brain's a bit of a mess. Threat emotions are designed to quickly turn on and turn off positive emotions. If we go shopping, and in 9 of the shops we go into, we have a lovely warm experience with wonderful assistants in the shop, and can I gift wrap that for you, sir? These are lovely warm experiences, and then in the 10th shop we go into someone who's just not really that interested in you and gives you the wrong change. What's going to be on your mind when you get back home after that day? Yeah, it's going to be the one that triggered your threat system. Even though it's 1/10 of the whole shopping experience, the threat system will have kicked it online. We'll just be focused on that, and we'll start grumbling to our partner about this shop assistant. So we'll start triggering her threat system as well. And then the kids won't have a very good evening either. So we've suddenly the threat system has suddenly like a domino effect taken over everyone's day, even though it wasn't really that necessary, and it wasn't very accurate either. It wasn't a very representative experience of your day. So it's a mess, your brain. It's tricky, really, really tricky. Excuse me. And it's not your fault. So in mental health, the field that I work with, as you might be able to imagine, a lot of the experiences that people have been through in their lives before they come to therapy are threat-based. So bullying, trauma, abuse, but also the kind of internal versions of this: self-bullying, self-attacking, self-criticism. A lot of the threat-based experiences in the outside world growing up have been internalized. So what we see is people coming into therapy with massive sensitized threat systems. It's been used a lot in their life. It's like going to a gym and just working out one muscle. It'd be massive. I haven't done that yet. But, this muscle will be massive and this one will be tiny. So people come into therapy with this massive threat system and this tiny little P soothing system. Because they haven't reported or experienced, feeling nurtured in childhood, feeling cared for. So this system in their brain, even though it's hardwired, it's part of our evolutionary history, it's hardwired, it just hasn't really been used, it hasn't had the chance to kind of be activated. So it's a tiny little system. It needs a lot of building up, really. So in these people who come to therapy, yes? Actually, that would be lovely. Thank you so much. Oh, this is the nurse in the room. Great, thank you so much. Thank you, that's really kind. So in mental health, what system is organising the loops? But actually, in our day-to-day lives, what underlying motivational system is organising our brain? And quite often it's our threat system. Oh dear, what's just come through the door? It's the bill. It's the mortgage statement. I'm sorry about this. I knew I was getting ill, but I don't think it would suddenly come out right now in the middle of my talk. So like I said before, this the motivational system organises all these different faculties of the brain. The way we pay attention, the way we behave, the emotions rushing through our bodies. Even the memories that we can access become very sort of patterned in a particular way, very biased. And this makes perfect evolutionary sense. When we're in our threat system, it's going to give us an evolutionary advantage if we can just access the memories of previous threat situations we've been in, or things we've seen on the TV that were kind of how someone else survived in this terrible situation. So everything just becomes very, very biased and shaped. And here we are thinking that we had quite a lot of control over our minds. We don't really. I mean, these systems just literally take over our perspective in very different ways. So that's how our systems are balanced. And what are we aiming for? Something a bit more balanced like this. And we're trying to do this for ourselves. We're trying to do this for other people. In my case, the clients I work with in therapy. But crucially, we need to organise our systems and our organisations in this way. Because, as someone who's spent a lot of time working in the NHS, if you're operating in a threat-based system, or even a drive-based system, like the City of London, Canary Wharf, it's going to have a huge top-down influence on how your brain is operating and is shaping up. So can we bring this kind of balance to all these different levels? It's not enough just to work with the person in front of you, but also working on yourself and the bigger system. So the first thing we can do is to start calming our threat systems down. And we can do this with our soothing system. So the soothing system is a natural, inbuilt threat regulator. It naturally activates the parasympathetic system, which calms the sympathetic system down. Maria will tell me it's a lot more complicated than that, of course, but this is the story that we'd be telling to our clients, and the story we'd be telling to the general public who are wanting to rebalance their mind. So can we start building up the green circle, the green system, in order to be able to bring the threat system down a little bit? We don't want to get rid of the threat system, of course, because if the number 10 bus was coming towards us, we kind of need our threat system to get us out of the way. But it's just, can we bring our mind into a more helpful balance? So I mentioned before about the attachment with a mother and baby, and the psychologist John Bowlby observed a lot of mother and infant interactions, hundreds and thousands, and he saw that actually babies have this innate structure in the brain that seeks closeness and feels safe when the parent is close. So our brains are actually wired up to be calmed down in the face of loving, kindness, connectedness. And there's quite a few people trying to look into the neurophysiology, safeness and connecting, and I'm glad to say that one of them has already talked to you, so I won't talk about that too much. But you can kind of see from an evolutionary perspective how these things would have been wired up. So for instance, it's really understandable why we'd have these neural circuits that have evolved to help us detect if an environment is safe. So just really subtle little changes in facial muscles from another person over the many millions of years of evolution. These little facial muscles, like a little smile or a little change of the ear muscles, we will have learned to detect that this means that our environment is safe. There are no predators around. So we can, it's just little smiling expression or body language, really important, because all this is wired up directly with the soothing system, activates the parasympathetic, calming the threat down. And the second thing we can do, first thing was to build up our soothing system. The second thing we can do is intentionally practice organising our minds by a different motivation. So instead, we can start organising our loops, organising the way we pay attention, the way we behave, the way we think, in line with the basic underlying motive of compassion. Very similar again to Maria's definition. It's really teasing out these two psychologies in compassion. One is the sort of sensitivity, the sort of engaging with suffering, or being sensitive and the able to connect, turn towards suffering. But then the other one is very much this sort of motivation and commitment to try and do something about it. So it's a bit complicated, compassion is a complicated thing. And a lot of the time I'm doing therapy or giving talks, I'm trying to spend a lot of time defining compassion. It is quite complicated, but a lot of the models and definitions seem to bring out these two areas, the sensitivity and the motivational aspect, to work towards its alleviation. It's really hard, actually. When we started, we thought, this is brilliant, we should start doing this in therapy. And the first people who started doing compassion-focused therapy, they thought, this is how brains work, this would be brilliant. Found that it hit across a lot of barriers and blocks. People are very afraid of developing compassion. So now we find that actually we've got whole scales that have been developed to measure what are the blocks to compassion for people. A lot of the therapy we do is helping people navigate through their blocks and through their fears. What are they afraid of? One thing is that, it might activate a grief response. And when a therapist starts being compassionate or starts doing compassionate meditations with a compassionate other image, a lot of patients will, well, I didn't have that, and that's really sad. So you're activating grief, sadness, and for other people it'll be more fear. It'll be more like, well, actually, if I let my guard down, that's going to make me really vulnerable. Is compassion letting the guard down? Well, no, it's not. But the connotations that people have with the word compassion might be quite soft, might be quite hippie. So people think it's a weakness. A lot of people think it's a weakness. So it's really important to get into the real nuts and bolts. It's actually a true strength. Being able to turn towards suffering and to do something about it is the hardest thing to do. The easy thing is to run that way. So a lot of time we spend with our clients thinking about the strength of compassion, the courage of compassion. One thing that is really helpful, it's just a sort of technique that we've been using a lot, is trying to create a self-identity that helps organise the mind in this way. So one of the ways in which we try and organise the mind by compassion is by developing a version of themselves or ourselves that has all these qualities. It's kind of it's a way of like gluing together the different aspects. The wisdom of compassion, the strength, the courage, the caring commitment, and sort of personifying it so that it's easier to start stepping into this character, a bit like an actor taking on a part, and sort of gradually sort of getting a felt sense of what this character is like, this self-identity. And this idea of a different version of you, when you think about it, it's actually pretty accurate, really. We are multiples. When we have an angry self, we have an anxious self, we have a sad self, and when we are in any of one of these particular selves, we will see the world in a completely different way. It's a bit like I was saying before, because our attention is paid in a particular way, our thinking is organised, our memory is organised in line with that emotion. So it's really complicated, but we can start sort of separating ourselves out. Like, what would my angry self say in that situation? What would my anxious self say? What would my compassionate self say? And the interesting thing is that quite often the selves don't get on that well. Like, the angry self thinks the anxious self's a bit pathetic. The anxious self's pretty terrified of the angry self. So we have these internal conflicts all the time, and actually what compassion does is it provides quite an integrating function for these internal conflicts. So compassionate self, with all its wisdom, strength, and care and commitment, can start kind of seeing, oh yeah, the anxious self wants that, angry self wants that. It's kind of like a view from the balcony, in a way. And the compassionate self also understands these selves. So actually, it's okay to be anxious self. So this is how, in a therapy setting, this might pan out. So we'd be using, just to give you a little taste of that, we'd have like lots of chairs in the room, maybe anxious self-critic over there. And in my work with people with psychosis, we would also have chairs for the voices. So it might be a very hostile, critical voice that someone is hearing. I'd like to show you a little video of how that looks. It's just a 5-minute video in a minute. But just to get more of a sense of how that kind of internal dialogue is created from the compassionate mind and the other emotional parts. Absolutely key, and anyone who's sort of practiced Buddhist meditation, mindfulness, the absolute key is just practice, really. I mean, there is a huge training element of this therapy and this approach. We really need to keep getting it, doing these meditations, doing these imagery exercises, doing mindfulness practice, doing the behavioural practice as well. Because this is how we start building up this compassionate mind, this compassionate part of us that has the skills and the wisdom and the courage to do the really hard work that's needed. Like getting in touch with this thing we're really scared of. Going back and processing the memory of this trauma that happened early in our life. So the practice bit is absolutely crucial. So the compassionate self essentially is a way of organising the mind, holding together the motives, qualities, skills, body posture, voice tone, facial expression. And the compassionate self isn't located in any one of these 3 systems. It kind of oversees the whole 3 system, and Maria talked about this before. There's a very important drive element in compassion, the sort of incentive side of compassion, but also the motivation to pursue compassionate goals as well. So compassionate self needs to kind of overlap all 3. And we position the compassionate self here in the centre. So it's kind of forming a safe base within the mind from which to do really difficult work, to deal with the tricky brain. So it's forming a sort of safe haven and a secure base from which to go into a trauma, from which to look at a fear. And like one of the people in the audience said before, to start relating to the people in our lives that we find the most tricky, and to start relating to ourselves, because sometimes we can find ourselves very tricky. So we position the compassionate self here in the middle. Oh, and this is just a slide that Paul Gilbert is the founder of Compassion Focused Therapy, and he's just always sending out these wonderful new slides, and this one only arrived a couple of days ago in the inbox, so I thought I'd throw this one in. I thought it was a helpful way of organising it. So actually, at this point, I'd really like to sort of credit all that Paul Gilbert's wisdom. He's a professor of clinical psychology at the University of Derby, and Compassion Focused Therapy has emerged from his, just wonderful wisdom and effort in reading pretty much every journal there is in history. This is one of his slides. This is what the sort of unintegrated, chaotic mind looks like, i.e. our mind. These things, these kind of anxious self and angry self, they kind of get a bit sort of enmeshed and wired up together because of, do you know about classical conditioning? Pavlov's dog, how things sort of get sort of conditioned together. So because of our childhood experiences, it might be that our sort of emotions have become quite enmeshed as well. So we might have responded, like when we were really sad about something and our parents were very angry, So we might have started sort of associating anger and sadness together, and it becomes so that when one emotion is triggered, the other one is triggered as well. So it's all a bit of a kind of mess in our mind. And what the compassionate self does, the compassionate mind can do, can start kind of differentiating the different parts. Now, a lot of this is what I do a lot in therapy. Start differentiating the parts, and then start sort of holding them together, so that they're not taking over. Any one of these emotions is not in the driving seat. The compassionate self is in the driving seat, but is very much in touch with all these different emotional parts. Okay, so I'm going to show you this, but it's on a slightly different bit of the computer. So this is a 5-minute film which shows the therapeutic journey of a young guy who experiences voices. So this film is really kind of showing how the experience with voice hearing interacts with his emotional systems. So we see his threat, drive, and soothing system and how they're kind of changing over time. And then we see him going into therapy and starting to do some meditations and calming his threat system down. And he finds a point at which he can start turning towards his voice hearing experiences in a different way, from that sort of grounded, centered place. So I'll just show you this.
This is a film about Stuart. Stuart and his voices.
You can't do
Football
it
today?
Brush your teeth.
No way. Football.
Get up, useless.
These circles represent our 3 major emotion systems and how they are balanced. The threat system kicks in.
They're coming for you. They've set you up. They know what you've done. They'll lock you up and never let you out. You might as well give up now. This is too much. It's all too much.
Pathetic.
Stuart's drive system comes online.
Come on, Stuart. They don't want you in the team. Miss, go on, miss.
Stuart is starting a therapy to help him cultivate compassion for himself, his feelings, and his voices.
Weak. You're weak for seeking therapy. You're weak. Be a man, walk away. Don't trust her.
Over time, Stuart's therapist gradually helps him to feel more safe. They practice exercises that help him feel more grounded and still. Slowing down his body using breathing and imagery, activating his soothing system. Stuart develops an image of an ideal, compassionate person, focusing on each of its compassionate qualities. He tries to imagine what it would be like to step into this image and become this compassionate person. He walks around, acting the part of his compassionate self, getting a sense of what that would feel like, how he would think, what he would do. He practices at home as well, and gradually begins to deepen his understanding and sense of his compassionate self. As Stuart feels safer, stronger, and more courageous, he decides to start a conversation from his compassionate self to his most critical voice.
Hello. What do you want, loser? I want to understand you. I want to help you feel safe. Safe? Nothing's safe round here. If it wasn't for me, you'd be... I know you're trying to help me. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me that I get scared. You're right, I do. But I want to start overcoming my fears now. I'm ready. You want to get rid of me. No, I don't. I don't want to get rid of anyone. We can work on this together.
Hearing voices is a common human experience. It can often be linked to something difficult or painful that's happened in the past. Although tricky at times, with lots of practice and encouragement, Stuart's compassionate self becomes better developed.
Danger! Back to bed. You're not ready. It's okay, guys. Thanks for the warning. I'll keep an eye out, but there's things I need to do today. Hey, it's all right. We can manage this. We'll see. Hey!
Stuart now feels safe in relation to his voices. He understands and accepts them. They're very much part of the family, but no longer running the show. With his compassionate self in the driving seat, Stuart can now follow his true desires.
So that's Stuart, and it's a little walk through what a therapeutic aim and intervention might be when someone's got incredibly distressing experiences with voices, really hostile, horrendous things, and actually just think about how much courage it takes to start being compassionate to those experiences. You know, what wisdom and what training and practice over time. So it's a really, it's a drawn out process. It's not a quick fix. But the wonderful thing about this film is that it is based on a real person who I saw for therapy in Brixton. But the narrator, Eleanor Longden, she is a voice hearer who I collaborate with on my research, and she is also an academic, but who had these horrendous experiences of hearing voices where they were very, very distressing and critical. And she found a way of compassionately relating to these voices. So now she hears voices, and they are a very important part of her life, and she's achieving wonderful things and carving out a really excellent academic career up in Manchester. She never had compassion-focused therapy, but she figured out how to do this for herself. And actually these voices, they represent something, or they're symbolic of something that's really quite scary, quite traumatic maybe. And maybe it's the most angry ones that are the ones that actually need the most compassion. But that's hard, to be able to develop the courage to do that. So I wouldn't sort of rush into this, absolutely. And maybe I wouldn't even do this kind of work with someone if it triggers too much threat to the idea of having a conversation with voices. But maybe what I would do instead is have a conversation between the compassionate part of you and the angry part of you, or the compassionate part of you and the critical part of you. So in a way, like the voice hearing experience is quite a nice metaphor for the kind of our own experiences with ourselves. So we can all do this. We can all be a bit kinder to the self-critical part of us, because actually this critical part of us is probably looking out for us. It's probably trying to protect us in some way. Doesn't sound like it, but its intention and maybe, protection-based. So we need to sort of decode that a bit and think, the reason I'm being critical to myself is because I'm a bit scared of this, of what I have to do. So do you see how the compassionate mind has that integrating function as well as that healing function for these emotional states? And it's something that we can all train ourselves in. It's not the people at that end of the spectrum who are most distressed by their emotions. We all have tricky brains. Like I said at the beginning, our brains are a mess. Our emotions take hold of us and start, we start seeing the world in a very different way that might not be very helpful. So we can all develop ways of being more compassionate to ourselves and others, and it's going to benefit all of us. And as a therapist in compassion-focused therapy, I do a lot of self-practice on this, because that's going to allow me to engage more with the suffering of people I work with, to be more tuned in. Someone mentioned about burnout before, to maybe have more of a resource against compassionate burnout by doing lots of this work on myself. All the little elements of this film are grounded in science. It's not just a nice story. It's that as well. So in the film we see Stuart practicing breathing. And the reason why he does that is because there's a whole literature about the sort of parasympathetic calming effect of soothing, rhythmic breathing, calming breathing. And they kind of say, the research is saying that a breath rate of around 5 or 6 breaths per minute is probably the optimum level at which to sort of calm the threat down. So people of, Brown and Gerbach in America, they've sort of dedicated their lives to finding out how we can you breathing and physiology to help work with these experiences in our mind. So this is an app. You can get a breathing app. So I'll set it to 8. That's a bit quick at the moment, so I might press the down button to get down to 6, and then press play, and then it will just guide me through sort of soothing breathing exercises. I get my clients to do that as well. The imagery practice. So here we have Stuart developing a safe place image in a forest. That's because safe place imagery is something that's been researched and is found to be really helpful on things like cortisol levels, which is a sort of biomarker of your threat system, of stress response. And compassionate imagery is something that Stuart does, and that's because there's an evidence base now that training your brain using compassionate images, compassionate meditations has tangible physiological effects and health benefits. We show Stuart practicing facial expressions, voice tones, body postures. These are all the things that are wired up together to help access, to help organise the brain in this way. And there's an evidence base for all these things. But there's still a lot more that needs to be researched. And we see him developing his compassionate self. So it's a sort of way of bringing all these practices together into one, so he can click into it a bit quicker in these distressing situations, like when he's going outside or the police siren goes off or whatever it is. So the self-identity helps him sort of click into all these practices that he's been building up over time. And this is just a real summary that I'm not going to go through, but actually some of these studies I think Maria talked about anyway. But there's lots of health benefits, psychological benefits of developing compassionate motives. Putting this to work, like I said before, it's really just practice. So this is just an example of maybe a sort of diary that someone might do to help them keep their practice up. This is the sort of thing I need to help keep my practice up. So each day maybe sort of doing mindfulness practice or writing a compassionate letter from the perspective of the compassionate self to the self, whether it's doing an imagery practice, something more behavioural, so just, the way we walk into Sainsbury's, just being more open and tuned in, to the checkout person, or so it's kind of finding creative ways in which we can just keep this motivation and intention there all the time, bubbling away as much as possible. We have to be, of course, very mindful, like I said before, about the fears of compassion and the blocks, because it's not easy stuff. It's a nice idea, all this, but it's really hard actually when you start putting this into practice. The threat mind shuts it down, and threat mind is always the default position. It's like that shopping experience, the 10th shop. The Sainsbury's checkout person might give you a dodgy look, which is going to shut down your compassion quite quickly. So it's a constant challenge to keep it going, but worth it. And also we can apply just little ways of helping us deal with difficult situations in particular, just remembering how to refocus our attention, refocus our thoughts in line with the compassionate motives to help deal with something that's quite tricky in my life. So there might be tapping into the wisdom of compassion. We find ourselves here with this tricky brain. It's not our fault. We live on a small blue planet, and seeing the bigger perspective of things. These might be really helpful insights to bring into moments when we're panicking. Another thing that might be helpful in a moment when we're panicking is to remember that diagram I showed at the beginning. If the anxiety goes up, all we have to do really is just let it naturally come down again. But what we end up doing is keeping it up here. So maybe actually when I'm feeling anxious, just telling myself, this will probably last about 5 minutes. As long as I don't keep re-triggering it, this will probably, if I can just allow it a bit of space, a bit of compassionate space, maybe it will just start naturally coming down on its own, because that's what emotions are designed to do. So bringing wisdom into day-to-day life is very important. We've started trying to do this more for the general public as well. So we're in the middle of collecting data on a 8-week compassionate mind training course, and we're about to run another one of these in London starting April. It's just we just want to kind of keep building up the evidence base, because then this is how you get your message across really these days, particularly in somewhere like the NHS, or who have the nice guidelines and everything. Really everything needs to be researched and evidence-based. Even though intuitively we know this is probably quite sensible stuff, we still need to prove it with numbers and figures for people to start implementing it at the organisational level and in healthcare. So, that's everything. Thanks very much.
We have some time for questions and discussion. Would anyone like to raise something?
First of all, thank you very much for talking about it. Very interesting, but also quite moving actually. But the second thing is, I wondered whether you had related your analysis and work at all to Ian Gilchrist's work about left and right brain. Is that familiar? It's the idea really that our society, the Western culture, has somehow focused far too much on the left rather than the right brain. And that's a cultural phenomenon rather than an individual one. I wonder whether you have looked at that at all.
Really interesting. Not in those terms, left and right, but we would try and formulate cultural influences based on the 3 circles model, which would be how in our Western culture we spend a lot of time focusing on the drive system, and organising our brain with competitive solutions, and actually the sort of health implications of that. So I think your point about the cultural differences is crucial, and we would certainly be looking to the wisdom around that. Just haven't linked it so much to the left and right brain. But what would be your thought of how we could bring it in?
About an hour.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot of
I
potential.
suppose really it's what I think in the group is that not only him, a whole group of people who are following in his line of work are saying is that our Western culture has really become dominant, and it's been over the last 400 years, so we've been very successful scientifically, technologically, financially, but we've lost something in all this, which is this emotional side, which is the right brain side, and that maybe other societies now, which unfortunately are tending what we see as the developing world, which is tending to take on board the Western culture, actually we should be looking at that to understand their emotional brain as being much more in balance than Western culture.
I mean, there does seem to be, thankfully, a bit of a rebound effect recently of where people are integrating more Eastern traditions and practices into Western systems and healthcare. And you have a lot of, I think they're even training in the Houses of Parliament quite recently in mindfulness practices. So I think there has been a bit of a kind of awareness that we've become we're only using certain bits of our brain, and it's actually caused, no wonder, like depression and stress is shooting through the roof. So I think there is a bit of a kind of recognition of that. But yeah, really interesting point. More to do.
You talked about voices. Sorry, over here. You talked about voices. I think for some people that might relate to the conscience that we were all perhaps given as children. And for some people that might relate to the voice of God. Any thoughts?
Yeah, this is a really interesting area. Can I answer that by telling you about some research that I've done on looking at comparing psychotic-like experiences in clinical and non-clinical populations. So people who have experiences like hearing voices in a benign way, maybe the voice of God, it may be are able to read the minds of people through psychic skills or mediumship skills. So comparing populations who are not clinical, they're not distressed, they're not struggling with these experiences, to the kind of things we saw here with voices. And what my research seemed to show from a qualitative study I did, which is I'm now kind of taking it a bit further with some quantitative data, but qualitative studies seem to show that phenomenologically there are a lot of similarities between the experiences and also the context with which the first experience emerged. And in both groups, whether it's clinical or non-clinical, there seemed to be quite a sort of immediate situational context of distress, searching for meaning in your life, feeling a bit of a dead end maybe. Those kind of experiences were being reported by participants, whether they were in the more spiritual group or the more psychosis group. But and phenomenologically, a lot of similarities in the subjective experience as well. However, there are huge differences when it came more to the interpersonal aspect of these, and how these experiences started becoming integrated. So, in the non-clinical group, there was lots of reports of, I could go and talk to someone who knew what I was talking about, who could share these experiences, who said, that's really important, that's really powerful, brilliant, we need to hear this stuff. Compared to the clinical group, which is like, I've had these experiences, but basically that's bad news, bad news, and you can see with our threat model how the emotions would be balanced. So you have the experience, and go and tell someone about it. One is a kind of green system reaction, which is connecting, bonding, feeling safe, so I can explore these. One is a very red system activation. Threat system gets triggered immediately. These are bad, you need to get rid of these, we know what to do, just trust us, the men in white coats, we'll put you in the hospital. that's a threat experience. So it's really important how these, the emotional context in which these experiences are had. And I don't want to go too much further in answering that because it's a wonderful area, but I'll find myself sort of, I don't know where I'll end up if I carry on talking. But thanks for the question.
I kind of ended up wonderful. Anyway, I just wanted to ask you a bit about, because it's personal interest, about the autistic brain and its relation to fight or flight and threat. Because the autistic brain has at its source a very different relationship to threat. Autistic children may not experience threat in the same way and may do things that are obviously a source of threat to other children. And they also melt down, overtaken by adrenaline and fear in situations which other people, other children are not. Have you considered this or thought about ways in which this kind of balancing can be useful in non-neurotypical situations? It's a question.
Yeah, it's not something I know much about autism, but absolutely, if you come into work with someone with autism with this kind of basic model, a 3 circles model, and just map out with them how their systems are operating, I think that could be really helpful insight into what we need to cultivate and what we need to build up. So maybe sitting down with someone and saying, what are the relative, if you could draw your 3 circles right now, what would be their relative sizes? And what are the sort of problems with that, and how is that helpful? I don't know if it's the same as in autism, but I know that in a lot of conditions that I come across in mental health, that people have hugely activated threat systems, but they also have the defence against that. They have the dumbing down of that. They almost become dissociated from their threat system. So they don't present as someone who's very emotionally salient or responsive. But actually, it's because they got such a whopping great threat system that it's a strategy to sort of keep it at bay. So it would be interesting to sort of see if some of that's relevant to in that situation.
A number of other questions.
The lady over there, I think, referred to the conscience as given to us as children, or something along those lines. Where do you believe, and where do you think research suggests that conscience originates? Is it nature? Is it nurture?
Do you have my email address? Is that quite a philosophical question? So I'm a scientist. Interesting. Anyone, what are other people's thoughts? Because I'm sure there's so much wisdom held in the room here. Does anyone else want to say something in response?
Well, I would think it's through knowing deep down there's no separation of self from each other or from nature. So, very deep-seated knowing of that,
You had a question?
I was just going to say there was a wonderful set of slides. Are they available on the website anywhere?
I think this has been recorded, so it's all going. I think it's going to be put on the website. Is it? I don't know.
This will be the recording all the sessions with speaker's permission will go on YouTube.
Yeah. So you have permission.
A lot of these strategies seem to come from Buddhist practice. So I was wondering whether anyone had looked at the efficacy towards compassion in Christian religions and Buddhist and Hindu and other things.
The efficacy.
Yes.
Towards compassion.
That they effectively develop compassion. Because I was practicing Buddhist meditation in 1969, where mindfulness was part and parcel of the spiritual practice. But how does the Church of England measure up?
So,
do we have anybody from the Church of England who would like to? Could we pass it forward and then Barry and then yes.
I'm desperately, thank you for your talk, I'm very helpful and interesting. I'm trying to formulate a question and struggling a bit in terms of science and faith, and particularly the majors of Abrahamic religions. I want to say that what I've heard from you and the previous speaker about how we've evolved cognitive, emotive, and behavioural systems to survive and to develop, I believe in absolutely. But from what you've said, it does imply that not only that what you were talking about is a therapy, but it could be conceived of as a way of life. And as such, could be a bit of a threat to deistic religions or theistic religions, which, because your system doesn't rely on any deities, as far as I can see, it doesn't require any outside influence. So I think myself there are consistencies. For example, it might be that you could conceptualize the compassionate self in a religious language as being the mind of Christ. You could do something like that, I guess. But how do you see, where do you think the Abrahamic religions stand in relation to a system like yours? Big question, I know.
Well, I think that we could and should be learning from each other, and rather than seeing it as a threat, think about, well, how can we integrate and learn, so how can the Church of England develop a message that resonates even further with people who have quite scientific minds and quite like seeing a bit of data rather than just relying on faith. And likewise, what can science and the therapy that I'm doing learn from the much greater wisdom that's been around for many thousands of years from the traditions. So again, it's about which system do you go into? Do you go into your threat system when faced with this question, or do you go into your connecting system?
Have you had threat responses from organised religion or not? Threat. I mean, did you feel?
I don't know. Am I getting one today?
No, not from us, I don't think. But, but there is a sort of way in which you could be.
No, I would love to do more talks within that environment. Unfortunately, my work is in quite a confined field, and actually, this is why today is such a wonderful experience, because sharing these ideas in a much more open way with the general public, I guess. Is actually, this is where I want to be talking about this really. And I'm really thankful to have connected recently with Josh, who's one of your afternoon speakers, who's someone that I knew as a teenager, and we're now studying compassion from very different angles. So he'll be talking more about the Christian angle, yes, I don't know. I'm not going to say I don't know what he's talking about, but for me, this is a wonderful, fertile area for mutual learning, and so I will spend a lot of time in my green system talking to Josh about this.
Yes, hello. Yes, I'd like to say thank you very much for your very interesting presentation, very thoughtful. My question rather follows from a previous one, which is you talked a lot, of course, naturally, as a person giving therapies, about compassionate self. That's the individual. But I haven't noticed that the world is made up of an individual. In fact, it's made up of communities and groups. So what I want to add, in other words, you define humanity, not by it is an individual. You define humanity as a group. That's fundamentally what humanity is about. So therefore, I have to ask, has there been any research on the compassionate group? Because I think that would be much more important than in fact just looking back necessarily solely into ourselves, which it seems to be, in the end, could turn out to be rather dangerous. I think there are benefits, but I can see that this isn't really what humanity is about. That's why I'm inviting you to comment on the compassionate group.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're quite right, and I'm sorry if I painted an image that was more individualistic. I guess in this, as a therapist working one-to-one with people, you do, and often the people I work with, their families are much worse. They're a nightmare, you know, and their communities. People come to me with no friends, and so a lot of the work, you have to start somewhere. But absolutely, I mean, I will be focusing on the 3 flows of compassion, which is self-to-self compassion, self-to-other compassion, and the capacity to be able to receive compassion from others as well. And these are all flows of compassion that we'll be building out. And a lot of the work will involve getting the collective around, getting the network solid, because we know scientifically that the social connectedness, social safeness has this natural calming down, soothing effect on the threat system. And this is why people feel within a group or within a community develop more courage to start exploring their own internal world, to start exploring the tricky things out in the external world. So I'm very much on the same page, and I'm sorry if I painted something that was quite sort of therapy-based. But yeah, the model expands out definitely into this sort of community solutions as well.
Thank you, Joe. I found that a very stimulating presentation. And following on from that last question, it's about taking that more from communities to organisations. One of your slides, you talked about organisations. So has there been much research or application around this approach to organisations, whether it is the NHS, a school, a small business, whatever?
I mean, they've had a terrible attempt at doing something in the NHS. Like David Cameron said, compassion sounds like a good word, let's write a paper on that. But no one actually understands the science of it. So it's been kind of rushed out in a bit of a haphazard way, saying that this is a good thing, but the staff on the ground have experienced that as a threat. It's like another guideline from that PRI ... to do something that we're not doing, you know, and so it's received as a threat. And then his other idea was to try and incentivize compassion. Let's pay people a bit more the more compassionate they are. But then you go straight into the drive system, don't you? Yeah, so they're completely missing the point. So if we really understood basic brain science and evolution, like basic roots of evolutionary psychology, we would understand how to actually cultivate compassion in our organisations, not by these quick fixes at all. I mean, if anything, they do the opposite. So as you can imagine, I'm quite passionate about how we can bring these, how we can bring this model to the more corporate levels and politicians and that kind of thing, so that it can be disseminated. It's very early days, and like I say, the previous efforts haven't really been science-based. So I'd hope that there'll be more efforts that are a bit more wise in the future.
Okay, hello Professor. Hello, thank you everybody. So I'll be very quick. If you don't mind, I'm so encouraged as a nurse who grew up in a pathological model with language that was so depressing, working in 3 different countries. In America also it was treated like a business, and I was saddened to see that, the modern is becoming the 51st state, in some respects. But I love your approach to the empowerment, and also that compassion is almost like the parent rock of the soil that is ourselves, and that you celebrate the fractured mind. It's often kaleidoscopic, you meet it where it is, and I've met so many schizoaffective people, so-called, that speak in metaphor, and so there's a part of their fractured self that is incredibly creative and also empowering, and you never argue with the delusion, and maybe that's the only glue that's sticking people together at that time. You just gently present as you can, and also having encountered the danger of hope with working with gang members, etc., in DC. And again, one line of the poem that we were creating, we were sort of flipping the coin from their hopelessness, saying, well, I'm no good, all I know is to do is to steal cars. I said, well, let's just look at that. You've already, you know how to pay attention, you're on the block, you're looking out, you have manual dexterity, maybe you could become a car mechanic, you know. And so just, and also how hard it is to sustain that hope so that they can hold it. One boy said, "You should never have shown me this," and then he ran away again, you know, and it was as if the hope was unattainable for him, and it's something that he couldn't sustain. And one other question I have, sorry to go on, but when you talk about the individual, I'm reminded of the way a cell works, and you know, we're always fighting entropy, we're always trying to unconsciously, even without our knowledge ourselves, individually are trying to achieve homeostasis. And that's a wonderful model for compassion, whatever religion you have. And I think it also, for those who do feel passionate about religion, I think it makes us more amenable to a common language. You know, that's all. Oh, and the role of forgiveness and compassion is the other one. So I'm not expecting you to answer any of those.
No, don't worry.
And I'm going to have to write a poem now on nurture versus nature.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Sorry, you go.
So I started with the talk by saying the brain is a mess. And I think this is really important starting point. If we actually understand how tricky, how much suffering that humans have caused, that you only have to open the newspaper every day, you can see what a mess our brain is and how tragic that is, the amount of hurt we cause to ourselves and other people. And actually, this is just a wonderful place from compassion to start from. And this is quite similar to Buddhism in a way, like being open to the suffering in the world, and compassion can stem from that place of difficulty, really, from the mud. And I think when it comes to professional relationships, this is more taking the first section of your question. As a professional, I can own how crazy my brain is when I'm relating to someone who thinks that they're just unique in their craziness, and that no one else is as weird as me, and no one else as messed up as me, and no one else has experiences that I have. But actually, I can come in from a different angle, saying, actually, you know, the brain is crazy, and actually, you know, this is something we can all share. And I will, as a therapist, maybe more than my psychoanalytical predecessors from like Freudian times would be comfortable with, I'm quite self-disclosing in therapy about some of the crazy stuff I do, some of the loops I get stuck into, when I get nervous in front of doing a presentation, that kind of thing, how I get into a bit of a loop, and it, you know, and I think, so coming from that point of normality rather than pathology, like we're the professionals and our brains are all perfect, yours are not, like the sort of them and us. Actually starting with a sort of common humanity. Actually, we're all struggling with brains that have been designed by evolution with a lot of flaws in it. There are a lot of things that are tricky. So I hope that does some justice to some of your point.
Just to follow up and to say, Charlie and I met beforehand to think about how our contributions to this weekend could work, and a number of the comments which have come up around conscience, community, organisation, contribution of different theistic faiths to this conversation, the face of Christ, which was raised earlier, were all things we spoke about actually in conversation previously, so it's encouraging to see that the conversation's carrying on. This afternoon I'll try to address some of these points in what I say in the second part of the afternoon session. So this is just a trailer towards that. I will try to address those things. But I found it very helpful to engage with what you've been researching, and look forward to it carrying on.
So I'm going to have to take Maria and you around with me everywhere.
Well, this draws to a conclusion this morning's session on science perspective compassion. I'd like to thank Charlie and Maria for leading in us very stimulating